Why does every team end up playing through Michael Olise? I started asking that question because a few weeks ago, Thierry Henry said something that stayed with me.
MVP will always be Kylian, because Kylian will put numbers that nobody can do. But the most important player is Michael Olise.
It's a surprising thing to say about a team containing Kylian Mbappe. Mbappe is the captain. He scores the goals. He's the player opponents fear before the game has even begun. So when Henry calls Mbappe France's MVP, that part makes sense. But then he separates value from importance. And he gives a second label to Olise. At first, it sounded like another former player praising a talented young attacker. But the more I watched France, the more precise the statement became. Because Olise was not simply playing well. The shape of the team was beginning to change around him. And it happened so much faster than France appeared to have planned. France began the tournament with Olise on the right. Dembele was given greater freedom through the middle, whilst Olise's job was more conventional. Stay wide, stretch the defence, receive in space and attack from outside. He was involved, but he was not yet the player organising everything around him. His positioning reflected that clearly. Most of his influence was concentrated on the right, with a few in the middle. Even his carries largely began from wide areas. Then, midway through the game, Deschamps changed it. Olise moved inside, and almost immediately, France looked different. He could receive on either side of midfield, turn towards goal and connect players who had previously looked isolated. The ball began finding him in areas where one decision could open the entire pitch. And that adjustment did not disappear in the next match. France kept giving him access to the centre. He still appeared on the right, but he was no longer tied to it. He could drop towards midfield, move between the lines, and arrive beside the striker. Against Iraq, the experiment continued. Against Norway, the picture became clearer. France were no longer asking how Olise could fit around their other attackers. They were beginning to ask how those attackers could function around him. By the fourth game, it no longer looked like an experiment. Against Sweden, Olise was appearing everywhere France needed an answer. He moved towards the ball when the build-up slowed. He found the spaces behind the midfield when France advanced. And when the attack reached the final third, he was close enough to influence the decisive action. This was not simply a winger drifting inside because the game had stretched. It was a deliberate change in responsibility. Deschamps had moved one of his most intelligent attackers closer to the centre of every important decision. The difference in positioning was unmistakable. He was now occupying the centre as much as the wings, and his movement with the ball now reached across the entire attack. Now, to understand why managers keep making this change, you have to look beyond the spectacular moments. Olise can beat defenders, he can shoot from distance and create chances that very few players can see. But plenty of talented attackers can produce highlights. What separates him is what happens between them. He receives without needing the game to stop. Before the ball reaches him, he has usually recognised the pressure, the next pass, and the space that will appear afterwards. He can accelerate an attack, but he's just as comfortable slowing one down. He does not treat every possession as an opportunity to force something. And that matters, because the player controlling the attack can not only be the most creative one, he has to be the player trusted to make the right decisions most often. Crystal Palace discovered this gradually. When Olise first arrived, he was an exciting young winger in a team with more established attacking players. He could create from the right, deliver set pieces, and change games in short bursts. But over time, his role expanded. Palace began placing more of their creative burden on him. He received the ball earlier in attacks. He was given the freedom to move inside, and instead of simply completing moves, he was increasingly responsible for deciding what those moves became. And by his final season, Palace were not waiting for Olise to produce occasional inspiration. They were actively searching for him whenever the match needed direction. The remarkable part is that the same process followed him to Bayern. A move to a club like this normally reduces a player's control. The dressing room is filled with established stars. Harry Kane is one of the finest finishers of his generation. There are midfielders capable of controlling possession and wide players built to attack defenders directly. Olise could have easily become one more weapon in an already crowded attack. Instead, Bayern gave him more of the ball. He drops deep enough to help possession move forward, then appears again around the penalty area to create the final chance. He can combine with Kane, release a runner on the opposite side, or carry the ball into space himself. The important part is that not every Bayern attack ends with Olise. It's that so many of them pass through one of his decisions. Kane still provides the most valuable finishing. Other players may offer more speed or directness. But Olise often gives those qualities structure. He is the player connecting one phase of the attack to the next. And that's what France recognised during the tournament. They did not move Olise centrally because Dembele had suddenly become ineffective. They did it because France needed someone who could bring their most dangerous players into the same attack. Mbappe could remain closer to the goal, runners could attack the space behind the defence, and the midfield had a player available between the lines. Olise became the link. Henry was not claiming he was France's greatest player. He was describing the player whose presence made the rest of the attack easier to organise. When you step back from the individual matches, the same pattern appears in the numbers. His touches have risen from under 69 per 90 during his early Palace years to almost 91 per 90 at Bayern. That's not normal winger involvement. The change becomes even clearer in the final third. Olise has gone from roughly 18 passes there per 90 to more than 36. Bayern are not merely finding him near the goal. They trust him to move the attack into dangerous areas. Key passes also increased as his role grew, reaching nearly 3 per 90 during his first season at Bayern. And the clearest jump comes in the quality of chances he creates. At Bayern, his big chances created have more than doubled from his early Palace level. Not every category rises perfectly every year, but together, they show the same shift: more touches, more progression, and more creative responsibility. The comparison inside Bayern makes the distinction even sharper. Kane is the scorer. Diaz attacks the box and threatens defenders directly. But Olise records by far the most touches and final third passes of the three. He also leads them in key passes and big chances created. This does not make him better at every part of attacking football. It shows that his job is broader. Bayern asked Kane to finish the attacks. They asked Diaz to stretch them. Olise is asked to connect almost everything in between. And that is why the word important fits him better than a simple list of goals and assists. Olise is not always the loudest presence in a match. There are periods where he appears almost detached from the action. Then he receives once, changes the angle of an attack, and suddenly every player around him has a clearer option. That influence is difficult to isolate in one moment. It builds through repeated decisions, a touch that escapes pressure, a pass played early enough for the runner to keep moving, a pause that draws a defender out before the ball goes somewhere else. These actions rarely become the image shown after the final whistle, but they determine whether a talented collection of attackers can actually function as a team. That is the pattern connecting Palace, Bayern and France. Each began with an obvious idea of what Olise was, a gifted right winger. Then they gave him more freedom. When Henry said this, it almost sounded contradictory. Mbappe was the MVP, yet Olise was the most important. But those descriptions are not opposites. One player can decide how attacks end, another can determine whether they will work at all. And that was the distinction Henry had noticed. So why does every team end up playing through Michael Olise? Because he does not need every attack to end with him. He simply makes more of them possible. And over time, different clubs, different managers, and different teammates keep reaching the same conclusion. The more of the game they give to him, the more the game begins to make sense.